So in this video, we are going to discuss the impact the French and Indian War had on Maine and the problems Maine was going through at that time.
One of the problems up here on the Maine coast is that land grants and land titles are just a mess.
The confusion in the region caused foreign interests to come in and interfere.
And actually, King James II, at the time, who had taken over the British crown, had claimed this section of Maine for himself, and Governor Andros being the representative of the British crown. Governor of New York, he also goes on to become the governor for the Dominion of New England, wants to secure this for King James.
These are not small conflicts that communities such as Camden or Pemaquid faced. These were larger, more complex conflicts.
These guys have the red coats that we traditionally associate with British regulars. And, it's another one of those stories here on the coast of Maine that people don't realize.
One thing that people overlook during the French and Indian War is that in 1677, Governor Andros sent a platoon of men and soldiers up to Pemaquid, specifically Fort Charles, which is located on a peninsula. And my partner and I were able to visit this extraordinary piece of architecture and see the fields that these men lived on for months and years. And it was very interesting, actually, to see that, this is where it all went down, Like, this is where it happened. And it was just, the history behind the fort is just mind-boggling. It's just beautiful.
Now these armed conflicts, which numbered over 100, involved the regulars of the Royal Army, settlers, and the Native Americans. Native Americans were pushed out of their villages, settlers were pushed out of their villages by Native Americans, and the Redcoats. Now, these conflicts still have racial effects that we can see today.
There was a real shame attached to Native heritage, and a lot of people did their very best to bury that heritage. There was a really tragic period in Maine's history where the government of Maine was actually removing Native children from their birth families, taking them out of those families, not in cases of abuse and neglect, but to force assimilation. And they were put in the care of white families. They were sent to special schools. A lot of these children suffered horrible abuse as a result. And the trauma of just being taken from their families really left deep scars for these people. And it wasn't until the late 1970s, well, I should say early 1970s, that there was an awareness of this, that the practice stopped. There's subsequently been legal movements. There's a movement afoot now, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is seeking to address and make amends for these shortcomings of the Maine government, if you will. So even though the wars here in Maine ended about 1760, kind of the war on Native culture continued throughout the 19th and the 20th century.
The French and Indian War is commonly thought of as genocide. And here's why, I'll tell you. It's because of the sheer amount of Native American casualties that occurred throughout the war. The Native Americans were prosecuted, as we all know, for their beliefs and their culture. And this was a big contributor to the racial tension that we saw for many years after the war ended.
The English population probably suffers about a 10% attrition rate here on the Maine coast. The native people suffer a staggering 30% attrition rate. Those are statistics that can't begin to compare to the Civil War, World War II, the American Revolution. And it's really just now that people are again beginning to celebrate their native heritage, take pride in it. There's been a resurgence in awareness of Maine's native people, and they're achieving a voice that they have not had for a long time.
It is because of programs and policies like this that Camden and the rest of the country are beginning to fix the racial tensions that have been binding us for years. And on the horizon, the future is looking very bright. The French and Indian War is a topic that is rarely discussed or taught in schools anymore. And that is really sad because the French and Indian War is crucial to the shaping of individual states and the country as a whole. So we need to teach and discuss more in depth of the French and Indian War.
On the board, what's happened to Maine's native people? Are they still here? And there were two answers that children had written up on the board, and they were absolutely fantastic answers, because one of them was, they're still here and they're everywhere. The other answer to the question was, they were all killed off. And there's a lot of validity to both answers. Yeah, the native people suffered tremendous losses during the course of these conflicts, but they did still remain in Maine, and they are everywhere in Maine communities. During the 19th century and the early 20th century, there was a real shame attached to native heritage, and a lot of people did their very best to bury that heritage. There was a really tragic period in Maine's history. This really is a race war. It's genocide here on the coast of Maine, and it's a really dark, tragic story that's been forgotten. My guess is part of the reason that it's been forgotten is a lot of people have wanted to forget about it because it is such a dark story.